Hello and welcome to this exclusive ICC series on Gukesh, the World Championship Challenger. Before explaining what this series will be about, a few words about myself. My name is Alex Colovic and I'm a Grandmaster. I was a professional player for a very long time, but nowadays I don't play so much, limiting my activity to leagues mostly. I have played pretty much everything you can imagine, from Olympiads to individual and team championships all over the world. Today I concentrate on basically content creation. I have my YouTube channel, I am active on social media, I have a newsletter on Substack, I have published 2 books, I'm an analyst, commentator, I have created courses for various platforms and so forth. So if you need to find me, you know where to do so. Now, about the series. This series is envisioned as analysis of Gukesh's games at various stages of his career. In this way, we will be following a career which is an exceptional one, one that is characterized first and foremost by an exceptional talent, but one complemented with hard work and determination. How otherwise can a player at only 18 years old get to the summit of the world of chess and challenge for the world championship title? Indeed, just imagine being 18 years old and a world championship contender, the youngest ever in chess history. The game I'm going to show you in this free preview of the series is the one that determined Gukesh's career. It is, to my mind, the most important game of his career up to this point, because this was the decisive game of the Toronto Candidates, the tournament which he won, and it is the game that gave him the decisive lead before the last round. This game was played in the penultimate round against struggling yet a very dangerous Alireza Firouzja, a game where a win managed to separate Gukesh from his competitors, giving him half a point advantage before the last round. In the last round, the games his game and the games of his competitors finished in a draw, which gave Gukesh a clear win, half a point ahead of everybody else, and a shot at the world championship title. So let's see what this game was all about, how Gukesh managed to win in such an important moment. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game. Knight f6 by Firouzja, attacking the pawn on e4, the Berlin defense, one of the most solid openings in chess. d3, defending the pawn on e4, bishop c5, short castle, and knight d4. Both players were definitely in their preparation, but as we will soon see, it was Firouzja who came out of the opening as the more satisfied side. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight d2. The knight comes to d2, and the idea is to attack the bishop on d4 and the pawn on e5 after knight f3. c6, attacking the bishop on b5, bishop c4, d6, defending the pawn on e5, so that after knight f3 the bishop can drop back to b6. c3, targeting the bishop on d4, bishop b6, bishop b3. The idea is to go knight c4, attack the bishop on b6, and then drop the knight back to e3, from where after queen f3 it can go to f5, a5. A nice move for black. The idea is to be able to drop the bishop back to a7 so that it remains on the active diagonal. Knight c4, attacking the bishop on b6, bishop a7, and now knight e3. The knight did its job on c4, attacking the bishop on b6, and now drops back to e3 And as we said, queen f3 and knight f5 is the idea. Short castle by black, queen f3, intending knight f5, and now d5. So now we are at the start of the middle game, and we can make some conclusions of how the opening went. There is this rule of thumb that in the Spanish, or the Ruy Lopez, if black manages to push d5 without any suffering any consequences, he should be fine. And this is true here as well. Black has good development, good center, and basically white achieved very little from the opening. And what is very interesting for me in this game is that how Gukesh managed to win from a position which offered him absolutely nothing out of the opening. So after d5, the first question that arises is that why or should white go knight f5 following the idea of his previous move? Well, while possible, this wasn't very good for white, and we will see soon why. After bishop takes f5, queen takes f5, d takes e4, d takes e4, queen d3, this is a very annoying move for white. The queen on d3 attacks the pawn on e4, and coupled with the idea of a4, a3, because after a3, b8, the queen would attack the pawn on c3, black obtains very strong play on the queen side. Now, having all this in mind, we can understand Gukesh's next move, bishop c2. So he understood, he saw this line that we demonstrated, he understood the importance of the d3 square, so he goes bishop c2, defending the d3 square, and now intending knight f5. g6 by black, covering the f5 square, and rook e1. It's normally a standard move for white in the Ruy Lopez, but here there is a concrete idea. What white wants to do is he wants to open the e-file by capturing the pawn on d5 and then dropping the knight back to f1 so he can target the pawn on e5. So this is white's plan. Bishop e6, black continues with development, e takes d5, white follows his plan, c takes d5, and now, before going knight f1, because the knight on e3 still controls the g4 square, white first goes h3. Now, not knight f1 because then bishop g4 would be a problem, but h3, controlling the g4 square, and now intending knight f1 to attack the pawn on e5. Rook e8 by black. Black anticipates play happening on the e-file, and in this position, Gukesh understands that the bishop on c2 did its purpose by covering the d3 square, but that is no longer relevant, so he activates it by going bishop a4 and attacking this rook on e8. e4 by Firouzja, advancing with the majority and attacking the queen, d takes e4, d takes e4, queen e2, and rook e7 avoiding the attack, and finally now knight f1. Now this was intended to attack the pawn on e4, but since now that pawn is well protected, the move with the knight has another idea, and that idea is to go knight bishop e3, neutralizing this bishop on a7, and also solving the problem with the development of the queen side, because the bishop on c1 and rook on a1 still need to be developed. Now, from this moment we can witness some very subtle play by both players. Firouzja goes queen c7, and you could say, okay, this is a normal move, yeah? The queen comes to c7, maybe wants to come to e5, there is maybe idea of rook d8, normal move. But in fact the move is a prophylactic one, and it's aimed against white's natural move bishop e3. After bishop e3, what Firouzja had in mind, thanks to this move queen c7, controlling the c4 square, is bishop c4, attacking the queen. And after queen c2, b5, and the bishop is in trouble. Bishop b3, bishop takes f1, rook f1, a4, black wins a piece. Very fine prophylactic move by Firouzja, queen c7. Naturally, Gukesh saw that, so he didn't go bishop e3, he went bishop b3, defending against bishop c4. And now another fine move, a4. Very aggressive, very ambitious play by Firouzja. Now there is another trap. Why not take the pawn? Well, bishop takes f4, a4 now runs into bishop c4 again, queen c2, and you would say What was the problem? There is no trapping of the bishop, and what's the idea? But the surprising move is bishop f1. And it's surprising because it eliminates a knight which apparently was doing nothing, but in fact it was doing a lot. Because the knight on f1 was covering the h2 square for the close to the white's king. And after rook f1, bishop b8, there is a threat of mate on h2. And after g3, knight h5, with ideas of knight g3, rook a5, swinging the rook, black has a decisive attack. So very fine, very nice move, a4, luring white to capture that pawn. But these players are the best players in the world. So Gukesh saw that and he took on e6 instead, following his plan after rook e6 to go bishop e3 and exchange the bishops. But black keeps on pushing, a3. And you can notice that up to here it was black who was actually the more aggressive side. He was creating threats, white was defending, dealing with these threats, and even though objectively the position always remained equal, you could get this impression that black had the initiative. And that was true. So how do you win games in such situations? And we will soon see. c4. So what white does is he removes the pawn from c3 so that he can go b3 and the pawn on c3 doesn't hang. And at the same time advances his queenside majority. Now knight h5. On the other hand, black has a majority on the king side and the threat is to go knight f5 or f5, f4. g3 by Gukesh, covering the f4 square, preventing knight f4, and bishop c5. So what Firouzja wants is that in case of an exchange of bishops, the queen is activated by capturing of c5, and at the same time he opens the a file for the rook, supporting that pawn on a3. And now Gukesh goes b3. So he avoids the wrecking of his structure after a b2. Black could have done that earlier, but white would have obtained counterplay along the open b file. So now he has, let's say, a solid structure on the queen side, but that a3 pawn may be dangerous in an endgame because it would be disastrous for white to lose that pawn on a2. But middle game is still on and black pushes on the king side. f5, bishop takes a5, queen takes e5, and rook a d1. And now we get this position where we can start see the beginning of white's counterplay. So up to this point he was absorbing the initiative and the attack that black had, but now he starts to create threats of his own. The threat is to go rook d5, attack the queen, and then double on the d file. Rook f8, yeah, black is grouping his pieces on the king side, but white also has all his pieces on the king side, so he can be let's say confident that he shouldn't, or at least he should be able to defend against any threats. Rook d5. And this is the first, I think, instructive moment in this game when it comes to psychology, because being under constant threat of an attack, it makes sense for white to exchange queens. And he could have done that by queen d2, f4, queen d5, pinning the rook on e6 and forcing the exchange of queens. And that would have ensured that he would not have had problems being attacked. But Gukesh is actually very accurate in the evaluation that he will be able to defend against black's threats and keeps the queens on board, keeps more pieces on the board, keeps the tension, with the hope to turn the tide in his favor. And that's, we will see, actually succeeds. So he plays rook d5, and after queen e7, a very important move, f4. This stops black's ideas of f4. Now it's not possible to take on f3 because queen e6 wins the rook. And after f4, it appears that black's attack has been stopped. But Firouzja finds a way. Knight f6 first, attacking the rook on d5, forcing it to drop back to d2, and now g5. A nice move, offering a pawn, but if white takes it, f takes g5, knight d7, with ideas like knight e5, knight f3, queen g5, rook g6, and so forth, black would have had fantastic position. So what Gukesh does is he keeps it solid, and plays a natural move knight e3, blockading the passed pawn on e4 and reminding black that with his last move g5 he created a weakness in his camp, and that is the f5 pawn. G takes f4, G takes f4, queen f7. Another trap by Firouzja. Why? Let's take the pawn, knight f5. Free pawn, yeah? Wrong. Knight h5. And all of a sudden, black is winning. All his pieces are nicely concentrated. The knight on f5 is hanging, the pawn on f4 is hanging. There are threats like rook g6. And black is crashing through. Simply white is not well coordinated to deal with black's attack. Gukesh sees this and goes king h2, improving the position of the king and allowing for the white rook to get to the open file. Knight h5 for black, attacking the pawn on f4, and queen f2 defending it. And again, white is absorbing black's threats, and now he's already starting to think about threats of his own. The f4 pawn is protected, and now white wants to go rook d5 and remind black that f5 is a weakness in his camp. Rook g6, rook d5, attacking the pawn on f5, and knight g7. So black is defending his weakness on f5. And now this being move 38, players repeat moves to reach move 40. Rook d1, tending rook d7, rook h6. The idea is if rook d7, queen h5, yeah, attacking h3, so rook goes back to g1, rook g6, rook gd1, rook h6, rook g1, rook g6, and now we come to decisive moment of, I would even say, Gukesh's career. We come to a moment where white defended well for 40 moves, and many players in this position would be happy just to repeat moves and make a draw because, well, playing against a world-class player, playing well, defending, half a point, well deserved, good job, shake hands, go home. But that's not how you win candidates tournaments. Sometimes you need to take a risk. And if we look at the position, and what happened in the game up to this point was that black was the one pressing. But now black is no longer pressing anymore. In fact, if you look at it, it's white who has actually more pressure by targeting that pawn on f5. Black is not attacking anything anymore. And this shift in the momentum, even though objectively the position remains the same, is critical to sense while playing games. There are only two names that come to mind when it comes to being able to sense this momentum and use it to their own advantage. And these two players throughout history are Karpov and Carlsen. There are so many games that they have won after defending for so long, then equalizing, not accepting a draw, continuing the game, and taking advantage of the fact that their opponent could not adapt to the change of momentum. And here perhaps we can add Gukesh to that list. He decides to continue the game by playing queen h4. A very courageous decision, very brave decision, and also a very confident decision. He knew that he was no longer in danger, so he saw no reason not to continue the game and tried to see if, well, let's see if Firouzja adapts to a side now who needs to defend. So rook takes g1, king takes g1, king h8. Opening the g file for the rook, but the first step in the wrong direction. King f2, and now Firouzja follows on his plan to take the g file, but makes a mistake. The best move for black was to take the g file, but with a queen, with queen g6 rather than a rook. The problem with rook g8 is that now white had a great chance to obtain a winning advantage, and he could have done that by playing the move queen h6. Black is basically completely paralyzed, and what white wants to do is simply walk the king to the queen side and start advancing his pawns, and black can barely move. But Gukesh missed this chance and played queen g5 instead. But you know, these things, when it comes to these let's say life-defining moments, sometimes it is fate who decides. And fate decided that, well, Gukesh deserved the second chance to win this game, because here Firouzja could have saved himself with the move knight e6, attacking the queen, and after queen f5, queen g7, threatening queen b2, queen g1, threats against the king. Would have forced white to exchange queens with queen e5, but after queen e5, let's say rook e5, knight f4, threatening knight d3 and knight h3, material is reduced and the game should end in a draw. But fate said, no, you get a second chance, queen g6, which is a decision that is really difficult to understand, because in the endgame, if we compare the pieces, all white's pieces are better than black's. White has a centralized king, a blockading knight, and a dominating rook. And black's pieces are all stuck in the corner. So why exchange queens? Decision that is difficult to explain, but still one made by a world-class player. This time Gukesh allowed no more chances. Queen g6, hg6, and rook d6, attacking the pawn on g6. Apart from attacking the pawn, there is also the threat of rook b6, attacking the pawn on b7 and liberating the d5 square for the knight. That would have happened in case of king h7. So that's why Firouzja looked for some counterplay with rook e8, rook g6, knight e6, attacking the pawn on f4, and after knight d5, knight d4. So Firouzja sacrificed the pawn, but in order to activate his pieces and now threaten knight c2, followed by e3, e2, and so forth. It looks dangerous, but here we will see a conversion of an advantage in a very convincing fashion thanks to exact calculation. Rook b6, going after the pawn on b7. On the surface it appears that white is completely ignoring black's threats, but in fact this is not so. Knight c2, rook b7, and now it appears that white messed up, because let's see, e3, king e2, knight d4 check, king d3, e2. How does white stop promotion? But here comes the key point, and that's why it was important to take that pawn on b7. Knight f6, threatening rook h7 mate. So the only way for black to stop this is to go king e3. Not possible to take the rook because queen comes with check, but take the knight, still threatening mate. Rook h3, preventing mate, but rook e7, stopping the promotion and ending up a piece up. So very nice line showing the precision of Gukesh's calculation. So Firouzja plays rook e6, stopping knight f6, controlling that square, but now rook e7, and basically controlling the passed pawn and killing off counterplay. Rook h6, intending to take on h3, but c5. White is faster. If rook h3, c6, and the pawn promotes. So knight d4, trying to stop c6. King g2, now repetition of moves, defending the pawn, but rook g6, king f2, rook h6, and now Gukesh calculated that he can sacrifice the pawn on h3 by pushing b4, rook h3, and rook, king g2 first, getting rid of the rook, still threatening knight f6. Yeah, if the rook moves elsewhere, so rook h6 and rook b7. The idea is to support the b5 push. King g8, b5, king f8, b6, and basically it's game over. Rook is coming to c7, b7, and b8 are coming. Firouzja gave check, king f2, rook h6, rook c7, rook h2, king g3, and resigned. A truly impressive game to my mind by Gukesh, who, like I said, in such a high tension moment like a penultimate round of the candidates, he decided to not to take the safe road by drawing. He took the risk, he made a decision based on courage and confidence, and that gave him all the benefits he could dream of. So to my mind, this, now you understand why I think this was the decisive, well, actually most important game in Gukesh's career. By winning this game, he got to the match for the title. So this wraps up our analysis. I hope you enjoyed it. Join me in the exploration of the path that Gukesh made from his beginnings to the World Championship match against Ding Liren. Thanks for watching once again, and see you soon.